The Amorim debate. Why some are calling for change after Brentford. But is it really that simple? Welcome to Unite United News, your most trusted source for balanced Manchester United analysis and thoughtful discussion of the big issues facing our club. When heated debates emerge about our manager's future and difficult questions need asking, you need coverage that looks at all sides fairly. We've been bringing you measured analysis and honest perspectives for years, helping you form your own opinions based on facts rather than emotion. The question dividing every United fan: has Ruben Amorim really failed badly enough to lose his job after just months at Old Trafford? The defeat at Brentford has intensified calls for Ruben Amorim's dismissal, with critics pointing to poor results, questionable tactical decisions, and failure to get the best from expensive signings. The statistics make for uncomfortable reading. A win rate below 30%, and a points return that compares unfavorably to previous managers who were themselves considered failures. But before we examine these arguments, we should note that any discussion about a manager losing his job affects real people and their livelihoods. Football debates can become heated, but we should remember the human element while still analyzing the situation honestly. The calls for change raise important questions about patience, expectations, and what constitutes failure at a club of United size. Are the critics right that results and performances have been unacceptable? Or are they being too hasty in judging a manager who inherited significant problems? Examining the results. The numbers that tell a story. The statistical case against Amorim appears damning on the surface, but context matters when evaluating any manager's record. The basic numbers. According to the criticism, Amorim has overseen 33 Premier League games with 9 wins, 7 draws, and 17 losses. This gives him a win rate of 27.2% and a points per game average of 1.03. These numbers place him below several managers who were themselves considered unsuccessful at various clubs. The comparison with previous United managers since Ferguson makes particularly uncomfortable reading for Amorim supporters. Historical context matters. However, we should consider what Amorim inherited when he took charge. United were already struggling significantly before his appointment, having finished 15th the previous season with their worst-ever Premier League points total. The squad he inherited had deep-rooted problems that couldn't realistically be fixed quickly. Previous managers had also struggled with similar issues, suggesting the problems run deeper than just coaching. Time frame considerations. Judging any manager after such a short period raises questions about fairness and realistic expectations. Building new tactical systems and changing ingrained habits takes time, especially at a club where confidence has been low. Many successful managerial appointments have started poorly before eventually succeeding once their methods took hold and players adapted to new demands. Tactical concerns. The formation debate. The criticism of Amorim's 3-4-2-1 formation touches on one of the most contentious aspects of his approach: the system's challenges. Critics argue that this formation leaves the midfield outnumbered against teams playing with 3 central midfielders, as Brentford did in the recent defeat. This tactical imbalance can lead to being overrun in crucial areas. The formation also requires specific types of players to function effectively. If the current squad isn't suited to these demands, it creates obvious problems that take time and potentially new signings to resolve. Player adaptation issues. Some players clearly struggle within this system, which raises questions about whether the formation should be abandoned or whether more time is needed for adaptation. However, changing formation constantly can also create confusion and prevent any system from being properly implemented. Managers often face criticism both for being too stubborn and for changing too frequently. Historical precedent at United. The argument that United have traditionally been a 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 team has some merit, but football tactics evolve. Successful managers often implement systems that initially seem foreign to a club's tradition. The question is whether this particular system can work with these particular players, not whether it matches historical preferences. Team selection questions. The criticism of Amorim's team selections raises legitimate concerns about some of his decisions. Goalkeeper situation. The continued selection of Altay Bayındır despite poor performances and the availability of Sen Lamens does seem questionable. Goalkeeping is a position where form and confidence matter enormously. However, Managers often have access to information about training performances and personality factors that fans don't see. There might be reasons for these selections that aren't immediately obvious. Mainoo's limited role. The underuse of Kobbie Mainoo appears particularly problematic given his previous form and potential. For an academy graduate who showed real promise, being reduced to substitute appearances seems harsh. The suggestion that other clubs are now interested in Mainoo highlights the potential long-term damage of not utilizing promising young players properly. Balancing act required. However, managers must balance developing young players with getting immediate results. If Mainoo's performances in training or his fitness levels don't meet current requirements, the manager has difficult decisions to make. The challenge is determining whether these selection decisions reflect poor judgment or necessary short-term compromises. Player performance analysis. The criticism that Amorim isn't getting the best from his players deserves careful examination. Bruno Fernandes' role. The deployment of Fernandes in a deeper midfield role rather than as a traditional number 10 has clearly affected his influence on games. His statistics against Brentford, more clearances than key passes, suggest he's not playing to his strengths. This tactical decision seems to diminish one of United's most creative players, which raises obvious questions about the wisdom of the approach. Expensive signings struggling. The £200 million spent on new attackers has not yet produced the expected returns. When Bruno, Sesko, and Cunha have just 2 direct goal involvements between them in 6 league games, questions about coaching effectiveness are inevitable. These players showed quality at their previous clubs, so their current struggles might reflect adaptation issues or tactical problems rather than individual failings. Comparison with previous seasons. The point that these same players performed better in previous seasons at other clubs is particularly damaging for Amorim's reputation. If talented players consistently underperform, it suggests coaching or systematic issues. However, we should also consider that players sometimes need time to adapt to new clubs, teammates, and tactical demands. Not every struggling player immediately reflects managerial failure. The counterarguments, why patience might be justified. While the criticisms have merit, there are also arguments for giving Amorim more time to implement his ideas. Inherited problems. The scale of United's problems when Amorim arrived shouldn't be underestimated. Years of poor recruitment, tactical confusion, and low confidence created deep-seated issues that no manager could fix quickly. Previous managers with better records initially also ultimately failed, suggesting that quick fixes aren't realistic at current United. Integration time needed. New tactical systems and significant squad changes naturally require time to gel. The fact that expensive signings haven't immediately succeeded doesn't necessarily mean they won't eventually thrive. Many successful teams have had slow starts when implementing major changes before eventually finding their rhythm and achieving success. Market context. The current transfer market and financial fair play restrictions limit how quickly any manager can rebuild a squad. Working with inherited players who don't perfectly fit your system is a common challenge. Successful long-term management often requires patience during difficult transitional periods. The broader question, what constitutes failure? The debate about Amorim's future raises fundamental questions about expectations and timelines at modern football clubs. Realistic timelines. How long should any manager get to implement significant changes at a club with deep-rooted problems? The pressure for immediate results often conflicts with the time needed for sustainable improvement. Different stakeholders, fans, owners, players, often have different perspectives on acceptable timelines for progress. Measuring progress. Should success be measured purely by league position and points totals, or are there other indicators of progress worth considering? Improvements in player development, tactical coherence, or squad harmony might not immediately show in results. The challenge is determining which metrics matter most and over what time frame they should be evaluated. Alternative solutions. If Amorim were to be dismissed, what alternatives would realistically be available? The managerial market doesn't always offer clear improvements, and constant changes can create their own problems. Sometimes persisting with an imperfect situation is better than creating more instability through frequent changes. The human element beyond statistics and tactics. While analyzing managerial performance, we shouldn't lose sight of the human aspects of these decisions. Impact on individuals. Calling for someone to lose their job affects real people and their families. While football is results-driven, we should maintain perspective about the personal consequences of these debates. This doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations, but approaching them with appropriate seriousness and humanity. Squad dynamics. Constant speculation about a manager's future can affect player performance and squad morale. Sometimes this creates negative cycles where poor results increase pressure, which leads to worse performances. The psychological aspects of management and team dynamics are often as important as tactical considerations. Long-term stability. United's problems since Ferguson retired partly stem from lack of stability and consistent direction. Frequent managerial changes can prevent any coherent long-term strategy from developing. There's value in stability, but it must be balanced against the need for competent leadership and acceptable results. Learning from other clubs. Looking at how other clubs have handled similar situations can provide useful context for United's decision-making. Success stories. Some clubs have benefited from showing patience with managers who started poorly but eventually succeeded. These examples suggest that immediate results aren't always the best indicator of future success. However, these success stories often involved specific circumstances that might not apply to United's current situation. Cautionary tales. Other clubs have suffered from keeping ineffective managers too long, falling further behind while hoping for improvement that never came. The cost of delay can sometimes be greater than the disruption of change. The challenge is distinguishing between temporary struggles and fundamental unsuitability. Context-specific decisions. Each situation is unique, and what works at one club might not work at another. United's specific circumstances, resources, and constraints need to be considered when making these decisions. Generic lessons from other clubs provide useful perspective but shouldn't determine specific decisions. The financial reality. The financial implications of managerial changes also deserve consideration in these debates. Cost of dismissal. Dismissing Amorim would involve significant compensation payments, reducing funds available for player recruitment or other improvements. These financial costs must be weighed against potential benefits of change. For a club already dealing with financial fair play constraints, these costs could have meaningful impact on other activities. Investment protection. United have invested heavily in players chosen partly to fit Amorim's system. Changing managers might waste some of this investment if new approaches require different types of players. The sunk cost fallacy suggests we shouldn't make decisions based purely on previous investments, but practical considerations about maximizing current resources remain relevant. Opportunity costs. Resources spent on managerial compensation and potential new appointments could alternatively be used for squad improvements or facility upgrades that might have greater long-term impact. These trade-offs rarely get discussed in emotional debates about managerial futures. Fan perspectives and expectations. Understanding fan viewpoints is important, though they shouldn't necessarily determine club decisions. Emotional investment. Supporters invest enormous emotional energy in their clubs and naturally want to see progress and success. When results disappoint, frustration is understandable and valid. However, emotional reactions don't always align with rational decision-making about complex organizational challenges. Diverse opinions. Different fans have different perspectives on acceptable timelines, tactical preferences, and evaluation criteria. No decision will satisfy everyone, so clubs must make difficult judgments about competing viewpoints. The loudest voices aren't necessarily representative of broader opinion, making it challenging to gauge genuine supporter sentiment. Historical memory. Fans' expectations are often shaped by memories of past success, which can create unrealistic standards for current managers operating in different circumstances. Comparing current situations to historical peaks can be unfair if the context and resources available have changed significantly. Media influence and pressure. The role of media coverage in shaping debates about managerial futures deserves acknowledgement. Pressure creation. Constant speculation and criticism can create self-fulfilling prophecies where managers fail partly because of the pressure generated by media coverage rather than just performance issues. This doesn't mean media criticism is always unfair, but the impact of coverage on actual performance should be considered. Narrative building. Media narratives often become simplified into binary choices, success or failure, keep or sack, when reality is usually more nuanced and complex. These simplified narratives can make balanced discussion more difficult and increase pressure for dramatic decisions. Commercial interests. Media outlets benefit from controversy and dramatic stories, which can influence how they present managerial situations. Understanding these incentives helps evaluate media coverage critically. This doesn't invalidate legitimate criticism, but context about motivation and presentation is useful. Alternative approaches to consider. Rather than simply debating whether to dismiss Amorim, other approaches might be worth considering. Support and resources. Providing additional coaching support, resources, or expertise might help address specific weaknesses without requiring complete change. Many managers benefit from strong support teams. Sometimes the issue isn't fundamental unsuitability but lack of adequate support in challenging circumstances. Gradual adjustments. Rather than demanding immediate tactical changes or persisting rigidly with current approaches, gradual evolution might offer a middle path between extremes. This could involve modest formation adjustments, different player roles, or evolutionary rather than revolutionary changes. Clear expectations. Setting specific, measurable targets for improvement with defined timelines could provide accountability while offering fairness and clarity about expectations. This approach allows for objective evaluation while giving managers reasonable opportunity to demonstrate progress. The decision-making process. Understanding how these decisions should be made helps evaluate current debates about Amorim's future. Stakeholder input. Decisions about managerial futures affect multiple stakeholders, owners, players, fans, commercial partners, whose perspectives all have some validity even when they conflict. Balancing these different interests requires careful judgment about relative priorities and long-term consequences. Evidence-based analysis. Rather than relying purely on emotional reactions or superficial statistics, thorough analysis of multiple factors provides better foundation for major decisions. This includes performance data, tactical analysis, player development trends, squad dynamics, and broader organizational factors. Timing considerations. The timing of any decision matters significantly. Changes mid-season create different challenges than summer transitions, while immediate decisions after poor results might be emotional rather than rational. Finding appropriate timing requires balancing urgency against thoroughness and considering practical constraints. Conclusion. The complexity of modern football management. The debate about Ruben Amorim's future at Manchester United illustrates the complexity of evaluating modern football management. While the statistical case against him appears strong, the reality involves numerous factors that simple numbers cannot capture. The arguments for dismissal have merit: poor results, questionable tactical decisions, and failure to maximize expensive signings represent legitimate concerns. When supporters invest so much emotionally and financially in their club, demanding accountability is reasonable and appropriate. However, the counterarguments about inherited problems, realistic timelines, and the need for stability also deserve consideration. Football management has become increasingly difficult, with shortened timeframes for success conflicting with the time needed for sustainable change. The truth is that there are no easy answers in this situation. Amorim's critics raise valid points about results and performance, while his potential defenders can point to legitimate mitigating factors. Both perspectives reflect genuine concerns about United's future. What seems clear is that the current situation cannot continue indefinitely without improvement. Whether that improvement comes through supporting Amorim's continued development or through change of leadership, something must shift to break the cycle of disappointment. The human element shouldn't be forgotten in these debates. Behind the statistics and tactics are real people whose careers and livelihoods are affected by these decisions. While football is results-driven and standards matter, maintaining perspective about the personal consequences is important. Ultimately, the decision rests with United's ownership and leadership, who have access to information and perspectives that external observers lack. Whatever they decide, supporters will judge the choice by its results over time rather than its immediate popularity. At United News, We believe in presenting all sides of these complex debates rather than pushing simple solutions to complicated problems. The future of Manchester United matters too much for easy answers or emotional reactions to dominate reasoned analysis. Keep following Unite United News for continued balanced coverage of this developing situation and all the other stories that matter to Manchester United supporters. When the stakes are this high, you deserve analysis that respects both your intelligence and your passion for the club.